Hey everyone, welcome to today's program. My name is Carson Whitenauer, and I serve as the Executive Director for Uncommon Pursuit. And I am thrilled to introduce everyone to Laura Barringer, the co author of A Church Called Tov. It is an excellent book, and I am really looking forward to her insights as we talk about how to apply the concepts in that book to our online communication. How do we as Christians demonstrate Tov online? Laura, welcome to this Up Live event. I'd love for you to introduce yourself and explain why you are so passionate about this topic.
Sure. Well, Carson, thank you so much for having me. It's really an honor to be with you, a resistor. You are, your character is, and your commitment to doing what's right is very inspiring to me as well. So my journey started actually with the unfolding of the Willow Creek Community Church tragedy. It was my former church here in the suburbs of Chicago, where women that my family knew to be truthful were publicly called liars by Willow Creek's elders and pastors. And these women, we knew most of them, some of them were family friends, had told the truth about abuses done to them by then Pastor Bill Hybels. And he vehemently fought back. Willow Creek vehemently fought back. And I say vehemently, but it was also deceitfully. And the global backlash against the women was devastating, devastating to them, devastating to their families. And time went on, weeks became months, and our disbelief turned into anger because we knew the truth and it was buried by this church
Mm.
that we previously attended and loved, still love. But this church misused scripture, which I now understand to be spiritually abusive. Instead of telling the truth, it created false narratives. And we knew people who were unwilling to remain silent about the truth. And those people were viciously threatened by Willow Creek. So we're sitting here, my father and I, my family, watching it all happen from the sidelines, growing more and more infuriated, and just felt like we could no longer stay silent. So that was how A Church Called Tov began for my father and me, to write about a better way, to offer an alternative to hiding and wounding people and creating false narratives and abusing power. And that alternative, we believe, and why we're here today, is forming cultures that resist abuse and instead promote healing for those that have been wounded. And before we go on, I have to explain. I've mentioned my father a few times now. His name is Scott McKnight. Some of you may have heard of him. He is a New Testament scholar. He's a historian, theologian, a widely respected author. And I encourage, if he were here, he would say Laura was a pest. I pestered him for months to write about the truths that he would privately explain to me about how Willow Creek was misusing scripture, about how as Christians we need to be hiring character, and how Jesus' first concern was for people that were wounded. So we eventually decided to write together about a larger topic. And I persisted because I had this like burning inside me that would not quiet. And he had really the outline for the beginning of a book. And that's really how Tove began for us.
Yeah, well, I am so thankful for Scott and you. And both of you took time out of your schedules to encourage me and a few other people back when we were engaging with the situation at Ravi Zacharias International Ministries. And I'm so thankful for you, Laura, and how you pestered your dad to write A Church Called Tov together. And the wisdom and the humility and the care of your hearts really is expressed in this book in a powerful way. And it gave me language and an ability to name my reality and come to terms with what was so confusing. It was one of the resources that helped provide clarity and encouragement to resist this toxic culture and to attempt imperfectly to demonstrate a goodness that advocated for the survivors and sought to provide accountability to those who were um, uh, doing what was wrong. So I'm really thankful for A Church Called Tov. And obviously it was written to enable our local churches to resist that creeping sense of what's wrong and toxic, and to enable us actually to intentionally build good cultures. But I found it very relevant to a large nonprofit organization, and I think its
Mhm.
principles are applicable to how Christians engage online. And it seems to me that there's a big problem with how we're engaging online. But I'm getting ahead of myself. What is Tov? This is a weird word. What is Tov?
I had that same question a couple years ago. I would say, Dad, what is Tov? Tov is the Hebrew word for goodness. And I have learned that this little word appears more than 400 times in our Bible. And 7 times alone, it appears on page 1 of Genesis. We read, God saw all that he had made, and it was very Tov. So we know God is Tov. He does Tov. Everything God created and still creates is Tov. He designs us humans to be Tov. Jesus calls us to do Tov works. Our gospel, the good news, is Tov news. Our Bible, very literally, is the book of Tov. And so, what I have learned that Tov is a master moral category in our Bible. And as Christians, we should strive to be and do Tov. And like you said, today we're here to talk about being Tov online. And Carson, I think this is a really serious issue. I feel honored to have been invited about this topic specifically online. I believe our character matters with how we behave online. Who we are online is who we are.
Yeah, I think sometimes I want to pretend that who I'm online is not who I really am. And there's a rationalization that can take place in my heart. And so I just appreciate the moral clarity that what we do online, it is from the overflow of our hearts, and it does represent who we are. And one verse that I think connects to that idea is in James 3, where we read, with the tongue, we bless our Lord and Father, and with it, we curse people who are made in God's likeness. Blessing and cursing come out of the same mouth. My brothers and sisters, these things should not be this way. And I'm guilty as charged there. I'm not going to say that I haven't, violated that command, but I'm here today to learn more and think through how I can live out that verse faithfully. And so in A Church Called Tov, you and Scott write, culture socializes us into what is considered proper behavior. For Christians, this is true in our churches as well as in society at large. We're all shaped by our interactions with others, and that shaping becomes the culture in which we are all related, networked, embedded, enmeshed, and systematically connected. Toxic, flesh driven cultures breed a lust for power, success, celebrity, control through fear, an emphasis on authority, and demands for loyalty. And it seems to me, as I read those words, that Facebook and Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, TikTok, Reddit, MySpace, whatever you're on, each of these platforms and the millions of little sub niches within them, they're all socializing Christians as much as, or maybe more than, their churches. And some of the ways they're socializing us are in toxic, flesh-driven ways. And so I think we have this general vague sense that the way Christians are engaging online is not necessarily Tov. And so, Laura, I'd love your help to get specific. What are some of the particular ways we are not seeing Tov online?
Yeah. So I have a lot to say about that. Beth Moore, who I believe is very Tove online, recently tweeted words that have stayed with me for days now. I have not been able to shake them. She said, and I'm reading, I cannot caution you enough, Christian leaders in your 20s and 30s, but it goes for those of us past our 20s and 30s too, or with more genuine love and concern, to be deeply merciful to people in word and in deed. Be very, very slow to condemn, cancel, and claim what you would never do, especially publicly. You have hardly begun to be tested. And I think caution is a really good word. It's a warning of how we should conduct ourselves. Her words, condemn and cancel and claiming, are especially applicable online. So I'm going to start with 3 non-Tov observations of patterns or habits on social media, ones that unsettle and have disturbed me. And then I'll cover some more Tov ideas, ones I think can contribute to a Tov online culture, ways that Christians can be Tov online. So I want to say, first of all, I have to thank my dad for helping me here with the outline for this talk today. And second of all, I do believe, with everything that I'm about to say, I do believe there is a place for prophetic criticism when the powers that be refuse to listen. For example, in the Willow Creek case, the women did. They tried for 4 years to privately meet with the church leaders, and they did not get anywhere. So going public was prophetic, and it was something that they had to do. So I want to preface that with what I'm about to say. And Carson, if you want to interrupt me during any of this and have a chat or like talk more, feel free to do that. So the three negatives that I want to talk about are call out culture, cancel culture, and critical culture, starting with call out culture. So, this generally refers to interpersonal confrontations between people on social media. People are being criticized publicly or being asked to explain their actions. And from my observation, there's too much of it, and it's like it has become a modern form of public shaming. Call outs on the internet are really loud, they can be vicious, and I've seen piling on. David Brooks, one of my favorite authors, wrote an opinion article a couple years ago in the New York Times, but it greatly impacted me, called The Cruelty of Call Out Culture. And I really like that word, cruel, because that is what it too often is. And he wrote, you see that when denunciation is done through social media, you can destroy people without even knowing them. There is no personal connection that allows apology and forgiveness. There is no path to redemption, he also says, for those who have been accused. So we have to ask ourselves, Christians, do we really want to be in the business of destroying people, of destroying another human being? I find call out culture to be so divisive. It's too often rooted in someone's anger and fear. And to be honest, we are all one mistake away from being called out online, right? And so, and by the way, I also have to say, I'm not perfect at this. I'm learning and growing with everybody else. All it takes is a glance back at my Twitter feed to see the mistakes that I have made too. So I'm speaking to myself when I say, stop and think, why am I saying this? Do I have Tov motives for calling out a person that I don't even know? Call out culture. Okay. So next, I want to turn to critical culture, which also feels to me like a non Tov way to behave online. Sometimes it feels to me like on Instagram and Twitter, it feels like people are just sitting around online watching for somebody to make a mistake, and then they're ready to pounce when they see it happen. Some of you may have seen the story about Beth Allison Barr in late 2021. She is a professor and an author of a little book, no, not controversial at all, called The Making of Biblical Womanhood. So the Council for Biblical Manhood and Womanhood singled out her church, where her husband is the pastor, and criticized it publicly in their newsletter. Now, Beth Allison Barr does not hold any official role at the church at all. But the church itself was actually singled out. And it had already been struggling. The church had already been struggling. It's a small church after the COVID pandemic. So I don't have a problem with anybody disagreeing with an author. It happens to almost all of us who write. But to me, going after her church is an example of critical culture. You want to disagree with her? Sure. Disagree with her writing? Sure. But publicly criticizing her church that she has no formal role in, for me, crosses the line of cruelty and is really not Tov. Twitter is full of critical culture. Like I said, I'm guilty of this at times. I know I've made mistakes. I'm also learning to be more Tov online. And I also know, maybe you do too, Carson, I know what it feels like to be criticized online. I've been criticized, oh, you're just a teacher and you only have a platform because your dad is famous. And it can hurt. And I don't want to be a person that does that to somebody else. I know I've
Mhm.
made mistakes. I fought back publicly against a Willow Creek elder or pastor. I probably should not have done that. Somebody recently on Twitter wrote me and told me, you only have a platform because you have a famous father. And she mentioned nepotism. And I sat there for a second and I thought, you know what? Like, I need to learn and grow at this. So I just responded, you know what? You're right. You're right. I wouldn't
Mm.
have a platform if it weren't for my dad, but I still believe in what I write. And it
Right.
really softened and redirected and changed the conversation. And she ended up apologizing for using such harsh language. Um, so critical culture, it can become cancel culture which is what I want to turn to next, unless you want to interrupt me and say anything before I go on.
I'm just going to sit back and enjoy for now, but maybe I'll jump in after this point.
Okay. So cancel culture is my third observation of being of a non-Tov way to behave online. It's really the modern form of ostracizing a person, forcing them out of social, online, or professional circles, taking away their public platform or even their career. And I've
Mm.
seen people engaging in mass canceling, like as a way of expressing disapproval. And I want us to stop and think, like, is this really what I want to do? Do I really want to participate as a Christian in piling on and ruining
Mm.
somebody's career? I have
Right.
seen in the last couple of months, I have seen almost daily disturbing examples of Christians using, some of them have large social media platforms, but even if they're not large, it still bothers me, to tell their followers to boycott businesses because they don't agree with the vaccination policy for entrance. So if you don't want to visit restaurants because you disagree with their vaccination policy, either way, fine, but don't go online and tell your followers to cancel a small business that's already been hurt by the pandemic. We don't know. Maybe the business owner is a Christian and believes they're doing what's right. So I want us to consider using our platforms, large platforms and small, in Tov ways. And
Mm.
like I said, I'm disturbed by this practice. And I believe as a Christian, aren't we called to love our neighbor? How is it loving to tell others to cancel businesses? So those are the three negatives: call out culture, critical culture, cancel culture. I don't believe these are Tov ways to behave online, and nor will they promote Tov cultures online.
Yeah, I think that gives us a lot of very helpful language and categories to try and identify. Hey, which does this comment I'm seeing on Twitter, does it fit into any of those boxes? Or hey, I'm about to post this on Facebook. Let me just hold back and go to my checklist. Is this cancel culture? Is this being just critical for the sake of being critical? Am I calling someone out to shame them? Like what's behind this post? And maybe I need to take a night to think about it, pray about it. And if it's still a true and good thing to say, I can say it tomorrow. So I
Mm-hmm.
think that part of how these platforms motivate us is there's an urgency of what's on your mind right now, and I want to be in it while the conversation's hot, and maybe that'll get to some retweets. I don't want to miss the opportunity, and so I can't wait. I've got to say it now, and I don't think that those pressures are ones that we want to be sucked into, because the pressure we want on our lives is what's faithful to God, what's promoting God's kingdom. How can I be demonstrating goodness here? Not how can I be going viral. That's not the goal of our participation. And so I guess one kind of quick question I want to ask you, Laura, is how do we distinguish between like cancel culture and holding someone like, Bill Hybels accountable? Because clearly there's a difference between those two. And so how would you nuance that for us?
Yeah, and that's why I started the way I did, is by saying there is a place for prophetic public criticism when the powers are not listening. So, in the
Right.
case of Willow Creek, for example, you have women that are victims that are telling the truth, and they have been trying to meet privately with elders and pastors and have gotten nowhere and have been gaslit for 4 years. Those are long years of meetings, then finally go public. So I'm not
Mhm.
saying there's not a place for it. I definitely believe that there is. I'm just saying let's be cautious and let's pause before we say what we say. Let's not be
Hmm.
in the business of intentionally ruining a small business because we don't agree with their vaccination policy. Or let's not be in the business of piling on a human and ruining their career without really thinking about what we're doing.
Okay, thanks. That's helpful. So obviously, just avoiding non-Tove ways of being isn't going to make a difference. That's a start, but it's really nice to have a positive framework for what it would look like to be and do Tove online. So I'd love to hear your thoughts from the book and from your own experience. What are some ways that we could demonstrate Tove in how we engage people on social media?
Sure. So I'll share a few of my ideas now for creating online cultures that do promote Tove. And I decided I'm mostly going to just share examples because I think the ideas that I'm about to say are self explanatory. I'm going to share some examples of people that I have seen being Tove and intentionally creating Tove cultures online. So I'm going to talk about encouraging others, unifying voices, and leading our conversations and discussion toward Jesus and the Bible and ethics like peace and justice. Here we are on Martin Luther King Day and goodness. So I'm going to start with encouragement of those who are doing well. And I immediately thought here of Mary DeMuth. If you don't follow her online, I would highly recommend that you do because she is an encourager and her tweets prove this. Her online presence is Tove. She brings people together. She praises them. She prays for them. I recently, every now and then, Mary will start tweeting positive, like encouraging things that she sees about people. Like she tweeted, he adores the word of God. Todd Unzicker was the name of the person that she tagged. When I hear her voice, I smile. Megan Lively. She displays bravery. Ruth Malhotra, your friend,
Yeah, we got to
Carson.
stop for Ruth. I mean, I totally agree with that. And just one thing about Mary is the encouragement is so specific and
Yes.
detailed, and
Yeah.
it's clearly coming from a place of genuine desire to lift someone else up and support a
Right.
good thing that's happening in the world.
And what a beautiful way for a person with a large platform to build other people up and encourage them. She also said she is intelligent. She knows how to persevere. Karen
Mm.
Pryor. So, anyways, I highly recommend Mary DeMuth encouraging. Another suggestion that I have is using your online presence to unify voices, especially today, Martin Luther King Day in the United States. Let's learn to be sensitive about racism and diversity ethnically. Our social media could be used to speak Tove into racism. In January is also Spiritual Abuse Awareness Month. It's happening right now. And it was intentionally organized by a survivor herself named Catherine. And she has worked for months to record podcasts and bring together voices to raise awareness about spiritual abuse.
Mm.
Survivors are sharing their stories every Friday. She's got articles and meetings. I have even, on a personal note, received messages from some of my Muslim friends who asked me, I saw you posting about religious abuse. Does that happen in other religions besides Christianity? And I have found bringing these voices together to be a very Tove way to use your influence online.
Mm.
Back to the Beth Allison Barr story. So her church starts getting criticized. People start donating to Beth's church. And I just jotted down one of her tweets. She said, I just got off my plane. The first text I received was from my husband. More than $6,500 from 80 donors has been given to our church. It's close to paying for a month of our operating budget. We are overwhelmed, humbled, in awe of you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So that non-Tove story that I shared earlier became Tove because of people's goodness.
Mm.
Unifying voices, encouraging voices. And then the last one that I want to touch on is leading our discussions toward Jesus and towards goodness. Here are two people that lead and guide me online. I recommend them now to you. I already mentioned Beth Moore. I'll get back to her in a moment. The other one I want to mention is Robert Cunningham. We wrote about him and Tate's Creek in A Church Called Tov. People who know Robert Cunningham say he is the same as we described him in the book, and he is the same as how you
Mm,
see him on Twitter. He is Tov. He recently wrote, "The big changes you long to see in your life are produced by minute and mundane sacrifices today. Pick up your cross, follow Jesus in the smallest of circumstances this day, and one day you will marvel at what God has done." And he also wrote, "The grace of Jesus is tried and true. Trust me as one who has put it to the test. If it can handle me, it can handle you." So I love following him because it's like, I'm in the midst of a busy, bustling day in my classroom or being online. And I look at that and I feel like for a moment I've been led closer to Christ. Beth Moore also ministers to me online. On December 27, she recently said, she talked a lot about how she had a lot to tell Jesus and about how she sets aside days every year between Christmas and January 1st. And she deliberately reflects on the year and on her walk with Christ. And she opens her journal on January 1 every year and writes Jesus a long letter looking back on the last year. Um, she says, I know he knows, but I do this to keep a record of remembrance and
mm,
make bold petitions for my people and for myself. So those are three suggestions that I have. I'm open to more ideas, but I have seen Tove develop online with
mm,
encouragement, unifying voices, and with people like Robert Cunningham and Beth Moore that lead us towards being
mm.
Christ-like.
I love that. I think the encouragement one is really underrated, and
Mm,
finding that genuine place of seeing someone else who is doing well and to encourage them, not to help them go viral, not to boost their follower count, not to make them a celebrity, but just to look and say, I see something beautiful here and I want to celebrate that. I think that is a very powerful way that we can encourage each other from all over the world. And the power of encouragement can really lift our hearts. As I was kind of recovering from my experience at RCIM all through last year, and obviously I still have work to do, the encouragement I would receive from others would really was an important part of that healing process. And it
mm,
was not just online; it was mainly my family and friends and local people. But when it did happen online, that was very restorative. And so now I'm trying to pay that forward. And when I see someone who I can encourage and lift up, I'm very eager to do that. But your reminder today just encourages me to step into that more and make that a habit. Who could I encourage today? So, Laura, you've given us some very clear patterns of goodness that we can practice online. And I hope anyone who watches this might just, after they finish watching this, take a few minutes and write down like 10 ways that they could do something good online. And then you don't have to do all 10 of them, but maybe just say, okay, I could do these two and go and try them out. And let's just experiment in being good and come up with as many different ways as we can to demonstrate goodness online. Um, so one place of friction that we've alluded to a few times is the way that social platforms influence us. And every time you log on, right in your face, here's how many followers you have. Here's how many followers other people have. Here's how many likes you've gotten recently. Here's how many little hearts there have been. Here's how many retweets there have been. They're eager to notify you about all of those statistics. And
mhm.
here's how you're performing today. Here's whether or not you're becoming somebody is kind of, I think, part of the narrative of all those numbers. Uh, in A Church Called Tov, you and Scott write, celebrities want glory and fame. Jesus wants followers who deny glory and fame to pursue a life of service. So that that principle is very powerful. I agree with it. It just feels like social media wants me to go the other direction. So how do we implement that while we're online?
Right. It's like social media glory is measured on social media by how many likes you get and how many retweets. And I want to caution us, saying things in order to get more likes can be a really dangerous thing. Where does
Mhm.
it lead? When does it stop? Right? I'm a teacher and I teach young children, but I have heard over the years, as my students get older, parents will tell me that I grew up in an era before social media was really a thing, but kids now, parents tell me their self-esteem is attached to how many friends they have online, how many people are following them, or how many likes they get. And that's really scary and it's really dangerous. So I don't know that I have the answer to what you're saying, but I want to recognize the problem. And you're absolutely right that every time we log into Twitter, we see how many followers we have. Does this relate to how important I am? And as Christ followers, maybe it really shouldn't matter. It shouldn't really matter how many followers we have. My identity and my value doesn't come from that. I've heard many people, Laurie Anne just said recently, taking a break from social media can be really healing to the soul.
Yeah, and Laurie Anne is someone I cherish and am so thankful for. I was, misled about her and was part of, the brigade saying bad things about her, and had to apologize for that, and was actually thankful to apologize for that, and
Mm,
to seek reconciliation with her, and her graciousness and her forgiveness has changed who I am. And uh, I'm so thankful
mm,
for the example she sets online of forgiveness and mercy, and yet obviously an uncompromising moral standard that she is advocating for people to live up to. And so another person we can celebrate and say, hey, here's someone to go look at and see how they're doing it. I think
yes.
for myself, we need that band of brothers or sisters who give us courage. That
Mhm.
when there's something that's right to say, even if it's going to cost us access to a platform, or it's going to mean that people with bigger presences won't retweet us anymore because we're criticizing one of their friends or something, that
Mhm.
we have to have the courage to speak up for what's true and good, even when that offends those who are powerful.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying be foolhardy at taking into account all that you shared with us, that are we willing to have a small following, but know that we've spoken for what's good and just? And we need to be really comfortable with that whenever we're considering being online. Uh,
Mhm.
one other thing is that the way in which our emotions change us online. And so I confess that when someone with a larger following than me retweets what I have to say, I get a rush of endorphins and I feel
Mhm.
good. I feel important. I feel valued. It's like, wow, if this big somebody says that my words were worth hearing, that means something to me. And there's that rush of good feelings. And I'm just confessing to that. And yet I think that then has to be processed, because
Mm.
this feeling good about going viral is very different from doing good and being good. And
Right.
so I just want to vulnerably acknowledge that seems to be a real challenge to Tove online. So Laura, help us. How would you help us get past that and have the emotional healthiness that helps us keep being Tove?
Well, I think you said something. I confess to that too. You do get a wave of endorphin rush when, like, oh my goodness, so I must be important. Like, somebody likes something that I said. It
Yeah.
always strikes me as like, at any point I could leave social media and nobody would ever know that, like, I could just leave this whole world behind and nobody would notice and I wouldn't know what's going on. So emotionally, you know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
emotionally healthy rings really true with what you just said to me. I feel like at times social media, Twitter especially for me, can swallow me into this vortex of like anger and rage. And sometimes there's bots out there. They know that it creates more page views and likes and conversation. So I
Mhm.
think I think we just really need to stop and pause and think, like, is what I'm saying, where am I getting my identity from? Why am I feeling important because somebody with a big platform retweeted me? And we need to behave, just stop and be like, is this am I saying this out of love? Am I saying this out of anger? Am I saying this out of fear? I feel like if more of us could pause before we speak on social media, we might unleash more Tov out there.
Yeah. Well, and speaking of pausing, one practice I'm tiptoeing into and imperfectly practicing is Sabbath. And that's a
Mm,
much longer pause to say, I don't really need social media at all. And to experience the reality of my embodiedness and of my local context, I'm going to disconnect from what's happening online. So, like in the Uncommon Pursuit online community, we set up the software to disable any comments from Friday evening until Monday morning. And no
right.
one who is in strategy for online communities would say, don't let people participate in your community for more than 2 days a week. But at this particular juncture, I felt actually that's the best thing we can do for participants in our community is to say, don't be here for a whole weekend and go and enjoy your church and your friends and your
Yeah.
family and nature and take a nap, read a book. And so finding ways to prompt us to Sabbath rest. Because if I go online and I'm feeling empty, then
Mm,
I'm going to try and look for something in that context to bring me a fulfillment. But if
correct.
I'm already experiencing a fulfillment and a joy in my walk with Christ and my marriage and all these other things that are going on in my life, then there's an abundance that I can bring into this context. And I'm not looking to get filled up by what happens here. And
Mm,
instead, I'm coming in to say, how can I serve? How can I encourage all of the good patterns you've recommended to us?
mm,
So I want to turn to some of the questions that we've received from participants and anyone who's logged in right now. We'd love for you to throw your questions in the chat and try and get to as many of those as we can. Uh, Laura, I think one challenging question that needs a lot of wisdom is this. What are the appropriate boundaries for online interaction?
mm. Well, you just mentioned one. As you were talking, I was thinking, what a healthy boundary that Uncommon Pursuit has. We're going to set it aside and not look at it for the weekend and focus on what's real and true in front of us. So I would add that to my list. I would also add a good boundary. Let's not speak publicly about what is a private personal issue, right? What about using Christian virtue? Like, keep a balance of truth telling, but also approaching things with love and kindness.
Mhm.
Um, Another boundary I think that needs to be stated is that calling people out should be kept to a minimum in order to make it more powerful. If I'm constantly just going online calling people out, nobody's going to respect what I have to say because I call everybody out. But it's, like I think of my dad in all of his years of being online, he rarely calls people out and he has a large platform. But when he spoke about Willow Creek, people listened because it's not something that he normally does. So I think that's
Mhm.
also a good boundary to have is keep it to a minimum. And then here's another boundary I want to mention is that I feel like I see this too often. I'm starting to be able to recognize it more after reading more about the topic, but sometimes people can go out there and put out moral statements that sound really good, but when you think about it a little more, it looks like they're virtue signaling, like just trying to
Mhm.
make themselves look good and draw attention to themselves rather than tell the truth about something.
Yeah, I think that is a temptation I've probably fallen into. If someone wants to drag out some of my old tweets, they could say, hey, Carson, you might want to listen to Laura's advice here. So I'll try and take that to heart going forward. I think that part of what I'm trying to practice is vulnerability and
Mm,
acknowledging that I am in need of grace. I am in need of transformation, and I don't have it all together. I think that one place we need to be careful, though, is not oversharing. And sometimes I am concerned with how much people share online. And again, I want to acknowledge where that boundary is may be different for different people. And there may be a need to share our stories online for the sake of accountability and change.
mhm,
So I'm not making a blanket statement you can apply to any particular comment. but there is some kind of wisdom and discernment we need for practicing vulnerability, but not getting to that place of oversharing,
Mm-hmm.
and having people who we can share in the flesh with, I think, and get it all out with our counselor or a safe pastor or our small group or a spouse. I think that then helps us calibrate what we're going to share online. And if it is more vulnerable, we may want to run it by a few people beforehand and get some perspective on that and say, hey, I do want to be vulnerable. Here's the reason I want to be vulnerable. Can you just help me calibrate? Am I being vulnerable or am I oversharing? And I
Mm-hmm.
think having some caring, wise people in our lives can help us calibrate that. I think one other place I see for this is being careful with the advice we give. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so this can even take place. Recently, I got an email where someone asked me for some advice about a very sensitive situation. And I felt a lot of compassion for them, and I paused to pray for them. And it's a situation I've seen a number of times before, so I offered my perspective on it. But then I added a line at the bottom, and I said something along the lines of, I trust you'll hear this in the spirit I share it, not as the final word or as the right answer, but as one more perspective that you'll consider as you make up your own mind about the best way forward.
Mm.
And it's just that way of saying, like, I'm not in charge of your life. I'm just some other guy on the
Yeah.
internet. And you
That's
emailed me. You think I have something to help you with. This might help you. It might not be right. Like, I only have your email. I don't know the full
don't
story.
know you, right?
So please take this with a grain of salt. And I think just having some modesty about the limits of where we can help.
Mm-hmm.
I saw Diane Langberg, her pinned tweet explains that she's not offering counseling on Twitter
Yes.
because
Yeah.
of the professional ethics of her field. And so
Right.
going on social media and expecting to get pastoral care or expecting to get professional counseling, those are unrealistic expectations. And we need to think about exactly what kind of medium we're engaging in.
That's really good advice. Very wise.
Laura, another question for you that a participant asked is, how do we maintain our Christian identity in online circles when nowadays being part of an online culture can cause us to act in ways that may affect our witness? And this person goes into some of the things we've already talked about. They wrote, some of the ways I can see this affect us negatively include focusing on self instead of others, responding online in ways that can be hurtful as opposed to edifying, when engagement of online personalities seems to reward conflict as opposed to compromise, comparing ourselves to others in ways that can negatively affect how we see ourselves, and believing misinformation that causes us to become more prone to conspiracy theories in a way that causes us to disregard truth. So, those are some kind of structural temptations this person identified. How do we resist those?
Yeah. So, a great question. I have a simple answer. How do we maintain our Christian identity online? Be Tov, right? If you know you're not being Tov, stop. I haven't mentioned today the Circle of Tov that we wrote about in our book, A Church Called Tov. But what we did, I'll just mention it briefly now, is my dad and I started studying toxic traits of unhealthy churches and Christian communities. And we countered each of those toxic traits with a Tov alternative. So, for example, nurturing fear culture was a common trait of a toxic community where people are afraid to tell the truth, people are afraid to talk, they're afraid to ask questions, they're afraid. The opposite of that, the Tov alternative, would be grace. Nurture a community of grace where it's okay to make mistakes, it's okay to be who you are. So I guess I would answer that question by referring back to the Circle of Tov, and um, to answer how do we be Tov online? We are Tov online the same way that we are Tov in person. We're empathetic, we're grace filled, we put people first, we tell the truth, we nurture justice, especially a good one for Martin Luther King weekend. We nurture service, we nurture Christ likeness in how we interact online as we do in person.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's really helpful. And I think part of what I would encourage readers of your book to do is not just read it for information, but to read it for formation. And that
Mm-hmm.
means taking some time with each chapter and saying, okay, where do I see this taking place in my life? And what would it look like to be prepared next time I'm in that situation to bring the Tov alternative to that context? And so, for instance, if when logging into Instagram, the 10 people you follow are hitting you with all the things they've bought and how fabulous they make them, uh, okay, maybe take a step back and say, why do I follow these 10 people? These
Mm-hmm.
10 people make me
Yeah.
feel insecure, terrible, lousy. I can be on this app, but I don't have to follow these 10 people. And so
Mm-hmm.
maybe unfollow those 10 people and begin to search for the question of, when I join this community, what kinds of individuals do I want to influence me? And
Mm-hmm.
so I think just, getting very specific and detailed about how we can change these environments. I mean, just because I'm on Twitter doesn't mean I see everything that happens on Twitter. I
Right.
usually see the tweets from the people I follow. And if someone is consistently leading me to be tempted to live in a non-Tove way, that might be someone I need to unfollow.
Right.
And maybe there's another time or place to engage that person, but I don't have to, I'm not morally obligated to follow that person. And so I think finding these little adjustments to change what it looks like for us to be on these social media platforms is one of the ways to take the insights from A Church Called Tov and then make that fleshed out in terms of how we're
Mm-hmm.
engaging on social
Yeah.
media.
You also you brought up a good boundary, I think, is just because somebody's interacting with you, Carson, doesn't mean you have to interact with them, right? It doesn't mean that you have to be drawn into the chaos or the conflict. You can choose to stay out of it.
Yeah. And the tools do allow you to mute someone or block someone, and sometimes that can be a wise choice too.
Mhm.
One question we've gotten here from a participant is, uh, it's okay to name places of brokenness while also considering how to replace brokenness with goodness and beauty. I guess that's more of a comment, but I think that is helpful that we're not just trying to name everything that's non-Tove about the world, but we're also trying to be and do Tove in the world. And I like that maybe that could be a habit that people practice online. You mentioned when people went after Beth's church that
Mhm.
they saw non-Tove, and so they said, "Hey, here's an opportunity to be Tove. We see non-Tove." Instead of getting discouraged and having a big anger firestorm, the response was, "Let's respond to this by
Yeah.
being as Tove as we can." And I
Right.
think that's a really nice habit.
I do too. I love that example because it was, something that was intended to harm was turned around for good and built somebody up. And I don't want to quote the exact dollar amount, but it was tens of thousands of dollars were eventually raised for her little church. And like I said, they had already been struggling because of the pandemic. So I find it such a beautiful example of, let's use our voices for good instead of cutting people down, and let's assume the best about each other.
And I think another way that we see that is that, when we do see survivors who have been so beat down by the abuse they endured, and then often also by the institutional trauma that they've
Right.
experienced, that everyone came around their abuser and not around them, that's someone especially to lift up and encourage and seek to be Tove towards that person. Well, Laura, I think that anyone who's watched to this point is very brave. I'd like to thank you if you're still listening. But the big challenge of all of this is not just to have heard it and been inspired to change. The challenge is to put this into practice. And for me, the source for that comes from knowing the God who is Tov. It is because I experience in this moment that a Tov God knows me and loves me and is dwelling within me spiritually by the Holy Spirit. It's because everything about me that wasn't Tov was taken away from me because of what Christ has done, and the sense of release to have been forgiven by God and to have been transformed by God that gives me hope. If God has done that for me, how can I be that person um, who imitates the way of Christ today and shows that my allegiance is to Him and to His ways? And so I hope that we can keep encouraging each other to know this God of Tov. And as people who are named after Him, as Christians, that we could demonstrate that Tov in the world. So, Laura, I want to give the last word to you as we wrap up today's program. What else would you want to say to share your heart with us about how we build a circle of Tov culture online?
If it's okay with you, I'm going to read the prayer at the end of the book, just
Okay,
over
great.
us. Okay. So, a closing prayer. Father of all mercy, you know the hearts and minds and acts of all of your people, in person and online. You know all, and you reveal your truth in Christ. Grant to us, your people, to know the truth of the gospel, which unmasks our pretenses, our quest for power, and our sin, and to know instead the truth of your grace, which transforms us into Christ likeness. Grant further, O Lord, the rich graces of reconciliation between those on opposing sides of devastating events in churches, online and in person. Grant this so that we may live in the light, knowing the graces of your forgiveness and power, and walking in the way that brings you all the glory. Through him who lives with you, the Holy Spirit, one God, now and forever. Amen.
Amen. Okay, if you haven't read A Church Called Tov, I would encourage you to go and get it. I'm going to randomly select two participants from today's event and make sure you get a copy of that book. Laura, I am so grateful that you got your dad to collaborate with you and create this wonderful resource for the church. It's been very beneficial to my heart and my own experience of church. And I think anyone else who engages with it in a serious manner will be able to restore and encourage their church too. So, especially want to encourage people who are in church leadership, pastors, seminary professors, people who are in seminary. If you're on an elder board or you're a diaconate position, or if you have some formal leadership in a church, this would be a great book to pick up and encourage the leadership community to read with you and pray through and ask, what about this could renew and strengthen the way we do church here. So, Laura, thank you so much for giving of your time today and sharing how we can take the concepts of this book and apply it to our online interaction. My hope is that Christians will be known in a distinctive way because of how we participate online. People will see us online and go, that is light, that is goodness, that is beautiful, that is attractive. I wonder what kind of God inspires these people to be that way online. Well, as we close the program, I do want to invite you to check out the Uncommon Pursuit community. You can find us at uncommonpursuit.net, and we offer a transformative online community. And in this space, we are seeking to be and do goodness every single day as we respond to God's incredibly gracious initiative with us. And so we offer online courses and interactive discussions 5 days a week, and we would be so delighted if you would check us out and consider joining the community and offering your gifts and talents in this transformative space. Well, thank you for joining us today. Please check out our website for upcoming events. We have a number of other events that will be coming your way, all for free, featuring some incredible experts. And Laura, thank you for your time. Thank you for writing this wonderful book with Scott. And we are so appreciative of what we've learned from you today.
Thank you for having me. It was truly an honor to be with you. I feel blessed to have been invited. So thank you.